The Tet Offensive was a major turning point of the Vietnam War. The Tet Offensive was both a triumph and a tragedy in the sense that it was a major military victory for the U.S. and South Vietnamese. The U.S. Army wiped out almost all of the North Vietnamese forces, but weren't able to strike back due to a lack of troops and other political reasons. But simultaneously, it was a major political tragedy for the Johnson administration. This offensive was so politically devastating, it caused Lyndon B. Johnson to not run for re-election.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. Central Park is the starting point for the parade to the UN building. The estimated 125,000 Manhattan marchers include students, housewives, beatnik poets, doctors, businessmen, teachers, priests, and nuns. Makeup and costumes were bizarre.
The NVA attacked various major cities in South Vietnam in a guerrilla warfare campaign. They used the Ho Chi Minh Trail to transport troops from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trail traveled through Laos and Cambodia, making it extremely difficult for the U.S. to stop them without crossing those borders. Neither Laos nor Cambodia let the U.S. cross their borders to stop the North Vietnamese. This made it possible for the North Vietnamese to get troops into South Vietnam quickly and quietly. The initial goal of the Tet Offensive was to initiate a revolution in the South and create hatred for the U.S. and South Vietnamese to end the war due to Vietnamese public opinion. In fact, the North Vietnamese were counting on a revolution starting in the South because they didn't have the manpower to fight the war for very much longer. Even with support from the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union, the North Vietnamese did not have the materials or supplies to fight a sustained war for much longer. Even with the support from these communist nations, they were running low on supplies such as guns and ammunition. Furthermore, the U.S. was becoming much more effective at fighting in the jungle, and they needed to end this war with a decisive blow and gain more support in the South. The U.S. destroyed a large portion of the Vietnamese army and rendered them useless for further offensive in the near future. The Tet Offensive was a massive military failure for the North Vietnamese and was unsuccessful in starting a revolution in the South. The Tet Offensive proved that it was crucial to disable the North Vietnamese from using the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that as long as they had control of it, they could strike anywhere at any time in South Vietnam. If the U.S. was able to take control of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, then they would have been able to prevent the North Vietnamese from striking bases and cities deep in South Vietnam. The U.S. would have been able to focus their troops on the front and may have been able to push into North Vietnam. This offensive was a major military victory for the U.S., but it was a political disaster for the Johnson administration of gargantuan proportions. For months on end, the Johnson administration was telling the U.S. public that the North Vietnamese were defeated and that the war was nearing its end.
Military police got back into the compound of the $2.5 million embassy complex at dawn. Before that, a platoon of Viet Cong were in control. The communist raiders never got into the main chancery building. A handful of Marines had it locked and kept them out. But the raiders were everywhere else.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion.
After seeing the destruction of the Tet Offensive all over the news, the U.S. public thought that the war was just beginning, and the war began losing its public support. The final straw was when the North Vietnamese took control of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. This event was catastrophic to any chance the Johnson administration had in continued public support for the war. The public saw no reason for the young men of the U.S. to be dying in a country halfway across the globe. Large protests were organized all across the country, making it extremely difficult for Lyndon B. Johnson to be justified in fighting a war across the world. The major U.S. generals knew that if they were able to get another 700,000 troops sent to Vietnam, they could start a successful counteroffensive up into North Vietnam and destroy the North Vietnamese once and for all. But without public support, they knew the chances of getting those troops were very slim, and so any chance of a counteroffensive was shot down. The Tet Offensive was the turning point of the Vietnam War because the U.S. lost the support of its citizens. If Lyndon B. Johnson was able to regain public support over the war, there is a good chance that the U.S. would have been able to take control of North Vietnam. A guerrilla war would likely ensue, but eventually the U.S. would be able to pull out of Vietnam, and the South Vietnamese would be able to retain control over its country from the North Vietnamese.